Welcome everyone to today's session, Learning Through Storytelling, where we are celebrating the culmination of season 1 of JFF's podcast series, Communities in Recovery, and meeting the guests from our final episode, exploring housing, urban development, and how we can build the new normal together. My name is Mara Lackawan, and I'm a senior program manager here at JFF and part of the team that helped design and produce this podcast series. In Communities in Recovery, we set out to learn about the impacts of the pandemic on people across California and have had eye-opening conversations with high school students, college students, families, community and nonprofit leaders, as well as business owners and entrepreneurs. Their experiences have demonstrated the deep inequities that exist across California, as well as the resilience of individuals, families, and communities. From the stories we heard, we are discovering what it takes to make recovery more equitable. You can learn more about our work in inclusive regional economic recovery from our website, which will be posted in the chat. Today, we will share a brief video that highlights many of the guests and insights we learned on this journey, and then hear from 3 podcast guests featured in our final episode as we engage in a conversation around housing, recovery, and community resilience. Before we begin, I want to just thank all of the guests that shared their stories with us throughout this series, many of which are here today watching, as well as my JFF colleagues who contributed so much to making this series possible. Central to each episode in the series was a letter participants wrote to their past selves from March 2020, sharing their advice and inspiration for the version of themselves just entering into the lockdown and the resulting economic crisis. It's with this framing around reflection that we based our conversations. And you'll be hearing some of those letters from our guests later today. Let's turn now to look at our Communities in Recovery Season 1 highlight reel together.
Thank you so much for joining us. What do you remember about the week when everything shut down?
The pandemic hit us so fast. It blindsided us.
2020 will not be the year you planned.
You will close your business.
Your heart will break.
And the nightmare of COVID-19 is going to take over our lives.
There was a lot of fear of everything and everybody, of other humans.
As far as my professional career, my educational goals, it changed everything.
And it was my first time dropping college courses, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't do that.
Those people that you are calling voiceless, they're not voiceless.
Having a kid is already a full-time job as it is. So put on schoolwork, that's just crazy amount of stress.
Immigrants are alone, sometimes without family, without support. It's really difficult.
We have to look at the disinvestment that has happened in our communities.
All of the plans that I had, all of that was kind of fading away. It was a little scary and definitely stressful.
It's important for the system to really recognize what everyone's gone through over the last year.
The people with the most at stake need to be in charge of leading what the solutions are.
Whether you believe it or not, we are all interconnected.
You have to support the people that are supporting our ecosystem.
No matter how hard it might be, it's possible.
While we can't change the past, we can look toward the future with hope.
Great. That was our Communities in Recovery Season 1 highlight reel. We're going to turn now to the guests who were featured in our 6th and final episode on their reactions to seeing that video. I'll introduce them now. First, I'd like to welcome Lauren Kennedy, Executive Director of the North Valley Housing Trust, located in Chico, California. In addition to her role at the Housing Trust, Lauren is a licensed realtor specializing in community properties. She is also a caregiver, a shelter volunteer, a proud auntie, a renter, and a person who has a lot to be thankful for. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
Welcome. We also welcome Tyrone Roderick Williams. Tyrone is the Deputy Executive Director at the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency and the Sacramento Promise Zone. His development activities have been at the forefront of affordable housing and comprehensive neighborhood transformation efforts in Boston, Houston, Atlanta, and Sacramento. Welcome, Tyrone.
Glad to be here.
Finally, we welcome Julius Austin. Julius is the Sacramento Promise Zone Coordinator for the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency, the lead organization for the Sacramento Promise Zone. Mr. Austin has almost 2 decades of experience in the education field and the nonprofit sector, specializing in cross-sector collaboration and place-based initiatives. Thank you for joining us, Julius, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited to have you all participating today, and thank you again for your participation in our episode from Communities in Recovery. So before we hear your letters, I would just like to take a minute to hear your reactions to that video, seeing the whole season 1 kind of coming together and all of our guests that were featured.
Well, my first response was, wow, there are so many different viewpoints and areas of impact that I really can't wait to see the series. I think it was very inclusive and drew me in to want to see much more.
I'll jump in. I'm excited. I think that storytelling is so powerful and it allows you to gain so much from people's experiences and people's perspectives. And I think it's great because you can learn so much whether those perspectives and experiences are similar to yours or if they're different. And so I'm really excited about seeing the whole series.
I would echo those reactions. I look forward to learning more. It just reminded me that one of the hardest parts of this year was not being able to drop in and connect with as many people to hear what was actually going on with them. So it both brings up some of the tough feelings of the year and also helps fill in that gap where people's stories were missing.
Yeah, thank you so much for those comments. And others who are watching this live, please go ahead and continue to share your reactions in the chat. We're going to turn now to share some of the storytelling and the themes that we explored together in our podcast episode. To begin, I'm going to have each of you read the letter that you shared at the top of episode 6, and then we'll have some questions for you related to your letters and the work that you all have been engaged in around housing and economic recovery. And of course, time for questions and comments from our listeners. So Lauren, I'm going to start with you. If you want to read us the letter that you wrote to your 2020 self.
Okay. Dear Lauren from 2020, most of all, I want to tell you that here in June 2021, I'm okay. You made it. We're actually really, really good. I'm so proud of you, and I am looking back at you with so much compassion for what you're about to go through. I know you think that the worst of our personal learning curves are behind us after a couple of tough years, but oh, honey, it is going to be such a hard year. Like much, much harder than you think for you and for most people, and you can't help that. Both personal and external issues from grief, exhaustion, burnout to racism, economic insecurity, and political corruption, problems that are decades old will be accelerated and all need more help than is available. And there is no way to do good work in isolation, and we will feel isolated. The boundaries between our work and our other roles will collapse. And I'm not sure that it matters what I tell you, because sometimes we just have to go through things. But you do get 3 pieces of advice this year that make a difference. So just in case it helps to hear them sooner. Number 1, make it your work to connect. Measure your productivity by the honest, vulnerable conversations that you have. You are really good at doing this, so you don't think it counts as work, but it does. Number 2, when you are feeling low and cannot help but judge your life, judge it by the people who love and support you. There are so many, and look at them. Aren't those just some of the best people on the planet? Number 3, you better rest. You will need it. Really rest. You have permission, and it will take you too long to learn this, so get a head start. And finally, I know this is a pointless ask, but oh my God, please try to stay off your phone. Sincerely, Lauren, 2021.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I know it's really hard to sit down and write letters to our past selves, and thank you so much for taking part in that and sharing with us today. We're gonna hear more about your story in just a minute, but first I want to hear the stories from Tyrone and Julius. They have combined their letter to share with us how the past year impacted both their agency and their personal lives. So I'll turn it to you two now to share.
Dear Tyrone
and Julius from 2020, the two of you will experience a year that will impact your lives and your perspectives. 2020 will reinforce the importance of the work that you do.
you've just welcomed new staff members and have their training schedules planned for the next 90 days. However, in less than 30 days, you will experience a cataclysmic shift in your life. You will live through a worldwide pandemic. All unnecessary travel will cease, and you will not see your daughters or other relatives or persons in your life for over a year. Everything you have planned will come to a halt. And as the death toll mounts on a daily basis, you will hear of how communities of color are being impacted by this virus.
Though everyone in the world will be impacted and altered by the pandemic, people who fit the target demographic focus of the Promise Zone work will be disproportionately affected and in greater need of support and resources.
Your heart will break and your anxiety will grow.
The COVID-19 pandemic, social justice movements, and focus on anti-racism will shine an extremely bright spotlight on all of the issues and barriers that you have been working to impact and resolve.
Tyrone, you will pray continuously for the safety of your daughters, especially the one who's a flight attendant. You will watch your wife learn how to teach her 5th grade class online and push past an onslaught of technical difficulties and frustrations. Oh, but you will love her deeper and admire her more because of her unwavering commitment to teaching students.
Julius, you will have to deal with stress and anxieties as you guide your staff members through the pandemic quarantines, teleworking, and returning to working in the office. You will have to be supportive of your family from a distance since they live in other states. You will question whether you're doing okay with the pandemic because you're more of an introvert that likes solitude, or wonder if you're convincing yourself of that as a way to deal with the solitude and isolation that the pandemic has forced you into. Thankfully, you will be okay. You are resilient. You will thrive because you're uniquely positioned to help thousands of people deal with the impacts of the pandemic and the trauma caused by racism. You are not alone. You will see that though the issues highlighted and created by the pandemic and anti-racism movement are vast, there are opportunities to create innovative solutions that will result in more inclusive and equitable outcomes.
It will become clear to both of you that before, during, and after the pandemic, it holds true that working together to focus on the people who need it most is the best way, and maybe the only way to eradicate disparities and inequalities. Now that you've survived 2020, you will begin to thrive in the months to come. For hope springs eternal, and through it all, the work of changing lives continues.
We will continue to work together and build even more partnerships that will create positive impact and fulfill the promise of giving everyone in the zone and beyond a great chance at a life full of opportunities.
Sincerely, Tyrone
and Julius, May of 2021.
Well, thank you so much. Any reactions just hearing each other's letters now in this space together?
Lauren, I just want to say great job with your letter. I think that it was a really personable letter, and you shared vulnerabilities. And I think the ability to share a vulnerability really allows people to really learn what you're dealing with and what you're going through, and give them a great opportunity to learn from that. So thank you for sharing your letter.
I agree. And giving yourself 3 points. Oh, I wish I had somebody give me 3 points. Oh, gosh. But the good news is we have all made it. And working with Julius and I have been partners through this effort, along with many of the other folks here at the agency. But having a brother in the fight in many ways has made this much more palatable than it would have been if we hadn't had a chance to work together. So partnership has really made the difference, both in our sanity and in our impact as well.
All right. Now I can't let Tyrone say that without me saying those sentiments are mine as well. Love working with Tyrone. He is an inspiring person, and I would say he's probably the nicest man I've ever worked with.
I mean, that was one of my first reactions, is just how uplifting it is. It feels good to see that partnership, even in the writing and the reading of your letter. That's really uplifting. And that quote, working together to help those most in need first, being the only way to create this change. That just hit me, and I also just appreciate the shares that you made too. I pretty much, because we're a newer organization, do a lot of this alone, and this other perspective into, okay, well, now what happens when you've got a team? Now what happens when you've got staff, when you've got programs depending on you, and you're going through all of those personal responses. Thanks for sharing that.
And thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And folks in the chat, please share your reactions as well. We are going to talk a little bit with each of our guests in terms of your follow-up and reactions to those letters, and a little bit more around your perspectives and the work that's been happening around housing in your communities. So I'll start with Lauren. If you could take us back again to the Lauren who is writing that letter. The far north in California has had its fair share of devastation over the years, with wildfires, as well as a history of displacement and trauma that you speak about in the episode. And what was different about that moment in 2020? And given the context of the far north, how will recovery need to look different?
Yeah, back at that time, we were working on trying to complete the last piece of a grant process that the trust had really been founded for before I had been hired. And the pandemic was really the last nail in the coffin of trying to get that work completed for us, because obviously we consider now far northern California as being in recovery from 3 disasters, because we still had not fully recovered economically from the recession and from the cutting of RDA funds in 2011 that we relied on predominantly for housing and eviction prevention for low-income households. So there was still the recession. Then we had the Camp Fire in 2018, had additional fires since then, and then the pandemic. And so for housing, as our shelter crisis escalates, we obviously had to cope with no congregate shelter for the emergency aspect of that getting worse. Construction was a mess. It was impossible to get safe crews together, and banks stopped construction lending, and materials costs became way out of whack. And then overall, there's just, if you want to innovate, you need to have an excess of something. You need to have an excess of people or of funds or of imagination or of energy. And we were out of all of those up here. So it was an extra challenging time. I know for me personally, I think those of us who did make it through, which not everybody did, I think we did discover new resilient aspects of ourselves. And I know at the Trust, we really came to see what our strengths were and what our opportunities were moving forward, that maybe we're less of the traditional route than what we had been founded for, but will ultimately, I think, make us a stronger organization.
Great, thank you. Julius, I'll turn to you next. You mentioned and talked about the work of the Sacramento Promise Zone in your letter. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that work looks like?
Certainly. So the Promise Zone is a federal designation that was awarded to SHRA in 2015, and it's what's called a 10-year place-based initiative that focuses on a 22 square mile area of Sacramento. So it encompasses parts of North Mid and South Sacramento. And the premise of the designation is what would happen if federal agencies focus more on the most distressed areas across the country and they funneled more resources and technical assistance. But more importantly, what if locally leaders across all sectors? So we're talking about our elected officials, our nonprofit leaders, our business leaders, our college and school district leaders, and other community leaders like our neighborhood association leaders and et cetera, right? What if all of them focused on collaborating more and making sure that resources and opportunities were focused on the most distressed area of Sacramento? And we are, yes, looking at things like housing and community revitalization, but it's a holistic approach. So we also are focused on education, health, jobs, economic development, neighborhood safety and violence prevention, and also looking at even art and how it helps people feel connected and to their culture. So it's a comprehensive effort. One of the things that comes with the designation is more opportunity for federal grants. And we also focus on non-federal grants in our Promise Zone. And we've been able to help bring in over $179 million into their Promise Zone focus area. So we're really proud about that. And we
Yeah.
also have hundreds of partners working together across all those sectors, like I mentioned. So, thank you.
Yeah, maybe that's something we can spend just another minute talking about, because in the episode you share that there were certain infrastructure and processes that you all had set up that allowed you to facilitate some rapid responsiveness to what was going on. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit of that in terms of what allowed you all to pivot quickly in this crisis.
Yeah, so we had a great infrastructure of, like I mentioned, hundreds of partners across all those sectors who already had created real relationships, mutually beneficial relationships, and an understanding of what all of us do and what types of resources and opportunities that we have for the community. And since we already had established the mindset of recognizing the collaboration creates great impact, we were able to continue to do that during the pandemic. And we were able to use what we call the Sacramento Promise Zone communication pipeline as well. And so in the Promise Zone, we share information and resources from all these hundreds of partners on our social media platforms. So Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We share information via eBlast. We also share information in our monthly newsletters so people can be aware of all kinds of resources and opportunities. And then we also do targeted emails for things that we know specifically help individuals. And so we were able to let people know about COVID-19 testing and information. We were able to help people get access to Wi-Fi and computers. We were able to help people understand where the food distribution centers were so people wouldn't go unfed. So that's just some of the examples of the types of things we were able to share.
Great, thank you. Yeah, lots of trust, lots of communication. Great work with all of that. Curious to hear from you and also Tyrone, how the Promise Zone and other specifically place-based work can play a role in economic recovery. What is the role of those types of initiatives?
I'll defer, Tyrone.
Oh, Tyrone, you're muted.
All right. Well, first, we talked about the importance of cross-sector collaborations. No one entity can do it all or should even be expected to do it all. And what we've done here in Sacramento is really focused on the elements of building those partnerships and teams, as Julius mentioned. But I think one of the critical elements of adjusting through this crisis and being resilient is really the forethought and planning that continued to go on. You talk about storytelling. We created plan and then something changed, and then we created another plan and something changed, and then the federal government sent out. So it was a continuous process of evolving as the pandemic evolved. And we are a flexible agency. We are the housing authority for the county of Sacramento. We are the housing authority for the city of Sacramento. We are the redevelopment agency for both the cities. So our agency and my department really is at the hub of the resources that we were able to send out. So the pipeline for the Promise Zone was a great tool, along with others, to get out information about, not only the shots, but now rental assistance, receiving $100 million to provide rental assistance and helping. So all of that has really been at the heart, and our leadership at our agency has been exceptional. We've got an incredible leader in the person of Lachelle Dozier, who guided our ship through all kinds of rough waters to get to where we are now. And our employees, we've got over 300 employees that we had to shift how they did business, and going from tele to working in the office to teleworking. So it was a major shift, and we were able to share that information with our partners through the networks that we have.
All right. I just would add to that, like, we continue to play our role of getting people to intentionally focus on the distressed areas and the underserved and underrepresented communities, because we recognize that far too often people consider those individuals voiceless, but in reality, what they are people who are muted by institutions, by systems, and oftentimes racism and discrimination play a role in that as well. And so I always want people to recognize that these are not voiceless people. They're muted, and they have very powerful things to be said if you listen.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you underscoring that. My next question, and this is my last one before I'll turn to the chat to see what questions are coming in, and we want to make sure we have time for some of those too. Tyrone, I'll start with you, but if anyone else wants to respond, please do so. But we're really, interested in what we explore in this episode is the role of housing and community redevelopment in fostering inclusive economic recovery. And you started touching on that just now, even Julius, around raising up the voices of those most impacted. What do you think about that, Tyrone? What is the role of housing and community redevelopment here?
Well, the role of housing from our viewpoint is it's fundamental. Without a guarantee of where you're going to lay your head at night, everything else is really up for discussion. So our goal is looking at how to ensure, one, that there's affordable housing, whether there's a pandemic or not. And so our department has been financing affordable housing throughout the county. We've been working with the city and the county in developing opportunities for shelters, both for families, for men, for youth aging out of foster care. So from that standpoint, we've been working and will continue to work, particularly with the support of additional federal funding that can expand housing opportunities and housing security, even through rental assistance. The role of housing in economic development and inclusiveness throughout our city is a key component. And as Julius shared, our focus has really been ensuring that those disadvantaged communities or at-risk communities or individuals are not left out, that we're constantly including their needs, hearing about their needs, and then trying our best to address that. So as this continues, even after the pandemic numbers, cease or reduce, we're still going to be as committed and even more committed to providing housing that leads to community stability and looking at bringing those resources, including economic opportunity. You can, it's one thing to live in a house. It's another thing to be able to have a job or a career so you can continue to stay in your house. And so we see those as equally as important, and we're equally committed to both of those and much more.
Thank you. Yeah. Julius or Lauren, do you want to add to that?
I'll defer to Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what was just said about before the pandemic, housing was already a key issue for us in economic development. And, when I was in my former life, I worked as a home birth assistant, and I switched careers after hearing an amazing midwife, Shafia Monroe, give the statement in a conference that you can't have safe birth if communities are not safe, if housing is not secure, if food is not secure. And it's really hit home this week. I've had multiple families messaging me who are currently living in their between cars and motel rooms, waiting for children to be born in the next few weeks. Those issues were already there in our community, and we've been trying to bring forth the message that as much resistance as there is to the cost of housing, that the cost to communities is higher without it. The emergency services that come because people's small issues escalate into huge issues are both traumatic for those community members and come at a cost for communities. And again, that piece of that community cohesion, that collective imagination, that spirit of working together and collaborating that's so necessary for the kind of economic ventures that stick and improve communities, all of that is missing too when a community is in trauma and at war over these basic needs of shelter, and then the education, the mental health, the food security, all of which can't be found without adequate shelter. So yeah, that's our message up here, and will continue to be that housing has to come first. And right now, I think we're at something at less than 2 units available for every 100 households, low-income households that need them in Butte County. Our county housing list for a relatively small county is almost 2,000 people right now. And we're a little behind. I remember when I first had family come to this area back in the 90s, the joke was that Chico was always 15 years behind the rest of the country. And so Star Wars was just showing up in the theaters. But I feel like now that's not quite as funny as we seem to struggle to catch up with the rest of the state and the country in understanding that the problems that we see visibly escalating in our communities in terms of homelessness on the street, emergency services being used, those are not a fault of the individuals experiencing them. Those are systemic issues with systemic solutions.
Certainly, I just like to add, without shelter, without having a safe place, it makes it impossible for people to focus on all of the other things. How can you focus on education and achieving academically? How can you focus on your health and being at your best? How can you do anything if you are worried about housing and you are in survival mode. And when you think about economic development, right, we want to bring new economic opportunities. But if there's no place for people to live and feel safe, then it doesn't matter how much uh, business you bring in, et cetera. I also want to add that if we're looking at economic development and we're looking at creating new jobs or trying to invite and encourage and incentivize business to come into an area, oftentimes what results is a displacement of people who are in a space. And if we don't increase the opportunity for those people to stay in the areas that they're used to and have affordable housing, then we know that there's going to be displacement. And so, um, all- housing plays such a vital role when it comes to economic development. So we must focus on making sure that there is adequate housing for people to come and move to an area. And we must make sure that there is adequate housing that allows people to stay where they're used to, so they can take advantage of the positive things that the economic development will bring to the area as well.
And that's a point that we are very deliberate about here at the agency. Everything that we finance, or I always say, if we give you $2.50 worth of financing, we're going to be monitoring you for 55 years, and there's going to be a long-term affordability agreement ensuring that those properties are affordable to low and moderate income individuals for a longer period of time. And that's one of the tools that we use to help ensure that people aren't displaced as development comes into communities.
Great. So we only have a couple minutes left, and there are some questions coming through the chat. So first one is, curious, as community leaders, you see these moments affecting your approach to recovery in your communities. Don't know who wants to take that first, but as community leaders, how are these moments affecting your approach to recovery in your communities?
So I'll say, sorry.
Go ahead, Lauren.
So we're a pretty rural area. So people are spread out. We also have lower population. So it's really hit me in these various recoveries how much, everywhere each person matters. But up here, we have such a small group of people working on each individual issue that I guess whatever it is people are working on, it really hit me this last year, making sure that the mental health and personal health of each person involved in solutions was also taken care of and addressed. I guess it's just you mentioned my vulnerability. I think I still had some of that, like there's a mask that needs to be worn at work and in professional settings, considering some of the surprising behavior in some of our local representatives. Between that and how necessary I think it is to connect as whole humans and real humans over this work to make sure that we're all okay as we're doing it. I feel like my vulnerability gloves have come off. I really just try to bring as much of myself and my own issues to the work as possible, so that we know we're not alone, and that we know that the real human issues that come up in taking these things on, we take them on from people we're helping. Many of us are experiencing them as we're trying to solve the problems themselves. So for one, I'd say that's a big one, is that it's cemented my desire to be a whole human in this work. And the other is just really to focus in aggressively at every level on that. Who needs help most first? Go there, do that. Whatever you got to do, whatever partners you got together, just do that.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my thoughts. The pandemic, as I said, even in our letter, it shined a bright light on disproportionality, and it shined a bright light on things like, everyone scrambling in regards to having to do distance learning, teleworking, folks worrying about their health. And these were things that, we fortunately were already focused on, but the pandemic has caused us to kind of take a look at these items and kind of reinforce our commitment to doing whatever we can to help the people who need it the most. And, you know, we already were busy before the pandemic, but as people's needs grew, right, we had to become even more busy. And you know, we always have a mindset of working hard, but we had to work even harder than ever before because people needed us more than ever before. And so, um, those are the things that stick out for me when I think about what the pandemic has done, how it has affected the work that we do.
And I'll be brief because I know that we're time. I think from a leadership perspective, having clear goals and objectives and being even more committed to advocating for what is needed. Because not only do we have a pandemic, but we were dealing with the whole racial inequalities that were already there, and being committed and articulate and staying focused was really what has gotten us through this and allowed us to continue to provide the kinds of services that we have.
Great, thank you. So for folks who want to listen to the full episode, the link is available in the chat. And please, I encourage you to go and listen to the full conversations with Lauren, Julius, and Tyrone. My final question for you all is, you know, what was it like to pause and reflect on the last year in the ways that you did through this podcast series with the letter writing? And why do you think this type of storytelling is critical when we are considering inclusive economic recovery?
Well, for me, I think it was, as Julia said, we've been so busy. I didn't even have time to pause. It was like every day being tumulted with issues. So this has really allowed me to take a deep breath and exhale and realize I've been through some stuff that I'm still standing. And not only that, we've helped literally thousands of people. And that's something to be proud, not in a proud way, but proud that we had an opportunity to touch lives in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. That's something I'll be telling my great-great-grandchildren about. And this has caused me to think about that differently.
Yeah, I mean, those same sentiments, I could say the same exact thing, so I won't. Don't want to be redundant, but I'll just add, it was a reminder for me that we are all so interconnected, right? This didn't impact just our community here in Sacramento or just those across this country, right? This impacted the world. And it's a reminder that whether you believe it or not, we truly are interconnected, and we have the ability and the power to either positively or negatively impact one another. And we all have different roles and we all have different levels of influence, but I hope that we all could use whatever that's within us to make positive impact and positive outcomes for people. And once again, I'll focus on those people who need it the most.
Yeah, it was a welcome opportunity to reflect, to really take the time and think of what did change over that time, and to reflect on, what really is important to hear as we get ready. We'll have more challenges like this, maybe not the same, but what is it that really gets us through? And I was reminded of Lloyd Pendleton, who has passed now, but he really led the Housing First effort in Utah to end chronic homelessness. And when the Housing Trust brought him to Chico to speak in 2016, he finished his presentation and I asked him, okay, so here's a person in this community who gets what you're saying. What can we do to do this in our community? What does a person need to do? And he said, you just need to stay. Keep showing up, because sometimes housing will be the issue and then it won't. Councils will be supportive and then they won't be. Governors will send funding your way and then they won't. But the work is the same and you just need to stay. And that really came to the forefront this year.
Wow, those are great closing considerations for us. I hope you all stay in the fight. I thank you all so much for participating today in our session and for your sharing those letters and more in our podcast. I encourage everyone to go check it out. And please visit us at jff.org to learn more about our work in inclusive regional economic development. The links for all of your organizations have also been shared in the chat, and I hope folks can go follow up on the work that you all are doing. So once again, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone joining us today. We'll hear from you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.